Hello and welcome to Reef Talk. I'm Scott Anderson with Mile High Reefers, and I'm here with Steve Rotter of RotterTube Reef. And today's episode, we're going to kind of talk about beginner corals. So a lot of people are kind of afraid to get into this hobby because it seems really hard.
What I'm going to add, sorry, I just want to add really quick. What's a coral? It's those cool things that look like plants in your saltwater aquarium.
It is. And in fact, it's kind of like a plant. The main food source is going to be the zooxanthellae algae that lives within the coral. And it's the coral itself, the algae is photosynthetic, and then the algae is what actually feeds the coral. Now, some corals feed from the water column, from foods and stuff like that. But the very basic ones that we're going to try to introduce you to guys today are probably just as easy as most of the planted aquariums you've seen out there. So the main thing that you got to have to keep corals alive is just reasonably good water quality and lots of light. And you got to have a good lighting spectrum to do it. So we're not going to quite go into how to keep corals alive today. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the easy corals to start with. So there are many ways to start in this hobby with keeping corals. If you want to do a SPS tank, you can absolutely do that as a new hobbyist, but I recommend a lot of research, right? If you want to start off with acros, they're difficult, the chemistry is much harder behind it, and I would recommend just start off full-blown SPS. Don't even bother with the mixed reef, go that route. But for most of us, the easiest thing to start with are going to be the LPSs, which are the large polyp stony corals, and the softies. Now, I'm a huge fan of soft corals.
Me too. That's all I've got.
So these are like leathers and zinnias and toadstools and all that kind of stuff. They're great. They're easy to take care of, and they're the ones that are actually going to give you the movement in the tank. So when I started in this hobby, I pretty much started with LPS and leathers. And that was the easiest thing I could find. The reason I like the leathers is they're fast growing and they're simple. You can put them in the tank and they can survive a lot of stuff that your SPSs are going to just fail in. If you look at my 210-gallon tank today, a lot of my early corals are still with me, even though I've had major tank crashes over the last 4 years. I've got leathers that have lived through heating spikes up, heating spikes down, bad water chemistry, anything you can think of, they've gone through it, which I think is pretty good. So, Steve, I know you haven't done quite as much with the coral, but what kind of corals are you keeping in your tank right now?
The very first coral I had when I started in the hobby with a 28-gallon tank, JBJ NanoCube, I went to the reef store and I knew I wanted to get a coral. I like a lot of movement, so I got the star polyp, which looks like grass on the rock. It flows really nice. Looks like a long grass bed. I love those guys. I love the star polyp. So I got the star polyp, which I still have today. It's spreading over the rock. I'm a big fan of the frog spawn. Again, flows nicely. Looks like the hammer. It's from the same family. You can put those guys together without aggression, because there are creatures, and they do have tentacles that come out that feed, especially at night. So they can be semi-aggressive, not so much to fish, but other coral. So the frog spawn, star polyp. I just got another large, as you know, frog spawn. I went into a local reef store that I've never been before, and I saw this large, like 8 or 9 inch wide frog spawn. I think it's 5 years old. The guy had it for 5 years. Had to have it. I knew I wasn't leaving that store without it, so I bought it. What a dummy. But it was more money than I wanted to spend, but it's awesome. What else? I used to have a torch. It died after 3 or 4 months. I think the nitrates were a little high, but I think it may have also had problems. What else? Oh, yeah, and then Dunkins. Dunkins are cool. I love them because they act like Venus flytraps. You can feed them with a turkey baster or put your hand in the tank and drop some Rod's food in there or frozen shrimp, and they close up and they eat it. Most of these corals, all of them, they will feed on the light, the photosynthesis. What else did I have? I had a torch. That's about it. So in my tank right now, I've got the star polyp, the grass for the flow. I've got a few different sets of frog spawn, mainly the large one. Oh, and I've got a hammer hammer coral. It's smaller, sitting on the sand bed. I'm still looking for a good area to place him because he's just not as large as he should be. So pretty much everything kind of looks like a frog spawn. I love the flow.
And everything you listed there, I think, are like perfect beginning corals. Yep. So the LPS are some of the prettiest corals out there, and the frog spawns, hammers, and Dunkins are some of the prettiest. They're relatively inexpensive, and they are just so much easier to take care of than a lot of things. Right. When it comes to frog spawns and hammers, I like to recommend the branching varieties over the wall varieties. If you don't know what the difference is, the wall varieties are going to be like one really big polyp, where the branching varieties are going to, as it sounds, branch off into lots of different polyps. But when things go wrong with the branching polyps, you'll probably lose one or two heads, something like that, where if something goes wrong with a wall hammer, you're likely to lose the whole colony.
I have a wall hammer. I fell in love with it, but I wish they had the branching at the time of the purchase, but yeah, whatever. Yep. Good point.
So that's one of the big things. Dunkins, in my experience, have been incredibly resilient. I've had alkalinity issues, temperature issues, everything, and my Dunkins have made it through without a problem. The Dunkins have been really tough corals so far. They grow reasonably quickly. They do lots of heads, but they don't go crazy taking over places. GSP is beautiful, like you mentioned. The only real concern you got to be with GSP is that it can take over.
Yeah.
So you got to be kind of careful with where you place it. Don't put it on a rock where you're planning on putting corals next to it or something, because it will just go crazy and grow over anything.
Or if you've got rock bridging from one rock to another, it'll grow over that. So keep it isolated. Keep it on a rock. Don't have any other rocks touching that, and it'll just stay on that rock. So unless you want a lot of this, that coral to spread, which I don't mind. But as Scott said, if it does take over the tank, it's going to be depending. If you have a small tank, especially, you're going to be limiting your space of where you can put the other corals, because that coral is spreading.
And it's the same thing with Xenia. Yeah. Xenia will take over everything. I love Xenia, but if you look at my tank, I've got a pretty good sized colony. It's on its own rock in the sand bed, and that's to help keep it from spreading. The Xenia will outgrow the rock and then just start budding off and throwing other Xenias off into the water column, and they'll attach other places. But just, the stuff some of the stuff like the Xenia and the GSP that I recommend, you got to be somewhat careful with, because these are the ones where you can become too successful with.
Just to add to that, I've had the opposite. I know everyone says Xenia grow like weeds, and you've got to be careful. And a lot of reefers have said, if I could do it again, I would never put it in my aquarium, because I'm constantly picking the Xenia out. It spreads like wildfire. I've had the opposite experience. For some reason, I can't keep Xenia in my tank. It withers down, it becomes really thin, and then it just kind of dies out. Whatever. I have
This is common with Xenia, and for some reason, I can't find anything that really explains why, but it seems like 80% of the people out there say it grows like a weed, and then 20% just can't keep it for whatever reason. Yep. Nice thing is you can usually pick up a frag for like $10 and see how it does in your tank.
Right. If that.
So, yeah, it's inexpensive, and it's really cool. The other nice thing about the corals that we're kind of talking about today is you're not going to need so much water flow. You're not going to need dosing pumps to keep this stuff going. Basically, frog spawns and that kind of stuff, you should be able to keep up with the calcium and alkalinity through your water changes. Maybe minor bits of hand dosing if you really got a lot of it in there. But with the really easy to keep corals, water changes are all you're really going to need to do to service these corals. It's not going to be like a big acro tank where you're constantly dosing and stuff like that.
Right. And you know what I do for that?
Which is a big bonus.
Right. Since I have a lot of coralline algae in my tank, which is the purple algae,
Yep.
I added maybe 6 months ago 2 large-size Pucani rocks. They were pure white, dry rock, just off the shelf in the local reef store. Pure white. They are solid purple now because I've got really great luck with the purple algae, which looks awesome, and it's a sign of a healthy tank. That requires a lot of calcium, and as Scott said, so do the coral. So what I do, and I don't really need to do this, but I do it so the purple algae, the coralline algae thrives. During my weekly water change of 10 gallons in my 125-gallon tank, when I do my salt mix, I'll take a 1/4 cup of calcium crystals from Bulk Reef Supply, and I'll just dump it in the 20-gallon Rubbermaid container in my 10 gallons of salt water that I make. Water changes will bring the calcium level up, but I like to add a little more calcium to really boost, to help that coralline algae, and it really helps a lot. The coralline grows faster, but I love it. So anyway, that's what I do for the calcium. But that's it. I don't dose anything else. I rely on water changes for alkalinity and everything. But again, I don't have the coral that you do, and the clams, you know.
But see, that's the big difference. I mean, some people make this hobby harder than it can be. My big tank, I mean, I consciously made that decision. I knew by adding the clams and the SPS and all that kind of stuff that I was going to have a much higher calcium and alkalinity demand on the tank, and that I was going to need much better water quality. But a reef tank doesn't have to be that way. If you stick with mainly softies and LPSs, you can have a tank that rivals the best SPS tanks out there, and you don't have to have the really expensive pumps because they don't have to have the flow that the SPS has to have. You don't have to have the dosing pumps because you're not using the calcium and alkalinity like the big tanks do. Mm-hmm. It's just the way you design your system. A lot of us who get really into the hobby, we like a challenge, so we go that route. But if you just kind of want to go middle of the road or do it easy, you absolutely can. There's no reason. I mean, honestly, the difference between a saltwater tank and a reef tank is lighting. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the big difference. If you want to do a softy tank, the difference between a softy LPS tank and a fish-only tank is just your lights. You got to have the right rock, of course, to be able to put your corals on, mm-hmm. but they're no harder than a fish-only tank.
Right, and that's a really good point. Don't feel that you need a lot of coral and a lot of, to have. You don't. A lot of people just have a fish-only, no coral, maybe a couple pieces of the softies, the soft coral that are really easy to keep, really no maintenance to those guys. Just have some flow. And it does make a difference. I like to see flow in the aquarium, which is why I don't have zoanthids any longer. Zoanthids are beautiful, especially under the blue lighting, but at night. But I just don't. I'd rather see, I love the flow. It adds to the tank, But yeah, you don't need all that fancy stuff because with the more expensive stuff and the better corals, you have to maintain them, which comes with dosing, and then you're looking at dosing pumps, and it's just extra maintenance. And to be honest, just for me, the less maintenance, the better. I love working on my tank, but I'd rather, work with the protein skimmer and cleaning it and vacuuming out the sump. I like doing the maintenance for the cleaning weekly. I don't want to worry about dosing for corals and this and that. And in fact, I don't even have an auto top-off unit for water. I just keep 1 or 2 gallons underneath my saltwater aquarium in my cabinet for top-off. And as I feed the fish, if it looks low, I just pour some of the water in. I don't want to mess around with all that extra stuff that's automated. I just want to feed them and do a weekly change and keep it simple. But that's just me. As Scott said, a lot of people like all the extra work and the dosing and this and that. It's just not me.
And there's a big learning curve to it, and there's a huge expense that goes with it.
That's also
once
my
you
problem.
You can keep softies and most of your LPS under moderate lighting, right? Mm-hmm. When you start getting to the acros and all that kind of stuff that are really sensitive, you start having better lighting systems. Well, all that stuff gets really expensive.
Yeah, really expensive.
I mean, high-end LEDs are just so crazy pricey. And you don't have to have that when you're setting up a reef tank. You can get by with much lower-end lighting if you stick with softies and some of your LPSs like Duncans and stuff like that. In fact, some of the stuff doesn't even like a lot of light, like your micro mousses and stuff like that. They don't want it. Mushrooms don't need a lot of light. Mushroom corals are fantastic for beginners. One of the biggest problems I had early on with mushrooms is I was putting them in too much light. They don't like it. In my tank, one of the bigger tricks I have with the mushroom corals is I stick them in low light areas because they do well there, and I need something to fill that spots.
What about your other softies, like your hammer? How is the lighting for those guys?
So the hammers love light. At the same time, I've put them in much lower light, and they've been fine. Obviously, they're not a low light coral, but you're not going to have to keep them under crazy high par. My Montiporas, which are an SPS, if you don't know, they're the plating guys. They love really high light. They're up high in the tank. They're very spectrum sensitive, and they just want to be pounded by light. Where a lot of the other stuff I don't have to do that with. My leathers and brain corals and stuff like that, I'm able to put much lower in the tank because they can tolerate much lower light levels.
And keeping all this stuff in mind, let's say you've got some coral that does not do well with higher light, but you've got others that need the higher light. So you need to have your lights higher, but then you need to figure out where you're going to place them in the tank. Maybe slightly under a rock where there's maybe some shadow or not as much light hitting them. Place them lower in the tank or higher. You're going to have to move these things around to compensate because some are going to like it, some are not. Other coral, they like the flow, they don't like the flow. That's something that I've wrestled with a little bit. You got to find the sweet spot in your tank. I'm still looking for that sweet spot for my hammer because it's supposed to be twice the size that it is, and it's not. So that's the thing with coral, too. It's a living creature. You got to find where they're happiest, move them around, see how they do for a week or two, move them again, you know.
Well, and what you're talking about, I think, is a great point. When you're going out shopping for your coral, have the place in your tank in mind that you're looking to buy for. Don't just go and fall in love with the coral. We all do that. Right. But if you can be looking to fill a hole in the tank, you can go to the store and then find the coral that works well in the tank. If you've got a place up high near the light under high water flow, then you're probably looking at a coral that can take that. But you can't take that highlight coral and then come home and then stick it kind of down low in the tank and low water flow in a kind of shadowed area. It's just not going to work. Vice versa, if you buy that mushroom and bring it home and stick it right up on top under a really intense lighting, you're probably going to fry it. So it's so much easier to have in mind the place in the tank where the coral is going to go before you bring it home.
That's a good point. Yep, it's a really good point. And
I've caught myself doing that many times.
I've done that, you know, and then I find, I don't have anywhere. So then you find yourself kind of like maybe doing a slight re-aquascape for part of the tank. And so, yeah, you go with that in mind. It's not that big of a deal, but it's just something to keep in mind. Like, I want to get all this talk on the Goniopora. I want to get another one, you know. But I know that they do really well with indirect flow. In the center of the tank on the ground would be the best. But that's where my 9-inch wide frog spawn is that I just bought. So, you know, I have to find another spot for that guy, and it's something I'm thinking about because I love the flow with those guys. Or maybe they do have at the local reef store a large hammer that's about 10 inches wide.
Oh, wow.
It's awesome. So I'm thinking about getting that guy. You know,
that'd be cool.
Not now, but I might want to just call him up and see if I can put some money down to hold it, because I can't afford that right now. But it's a larger one. Like I said, it's
make payments. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a small. You know, and I'm not getting crazy because a lot of people, they'll lose control and they become addicted to coral, and that's totally cool. Luckily, I don't have that problem. I'm just trying to. Yeah, you know, I'm just trying to add some more flow. Now that I'm thinking about not going with the 45, I want to add some more coral so it looks more like a reef tank. Just the softies, though, you know, not the hard coral, not the zoanthids. Another thing to mention on the zoanthids, another thing that it's not that big of a deal, but the zoanthids, they are toxic. So if you move them or you piss them off, there's no flow to them, but they will release toxin in the water, and it could harm your fish and, of course, your other coral as well. Anemones are another one. They will move, and that's why I won't have an anemone. It'll move till it finds a nice spot in the tank that it likes, which is good because it finds its own spot. You don't have to worry so much about placing it. However, it might find a spot that's not good, like close to a power head, and there are people where the anemone moved into a power head and it shredded itself. Yep. Instant toxin, massive nuking of your tank.
Yep.
And it
tank crash.
Killing coral, and fish don't like it. And I think the fish can die too, right? So
I have to imagine if you don't catch it soon enough and fix the problem soon enough that it could definitely kill the fish. And
clowns don't need anemones to host. They can host anything, frog spawn, anything with flow. My guys don't host anything. They have been known to host other things. My guys host one of the power heads. They're weird. They never move.
Mine host a clam.
Yeah, it's odd. They just never move unless it's feeding time. What else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the zoanthids can be toxic to you as well. Some of them can kill you. So you have to wear gloves. There was something I read where someone was boiling a zoanthid to make sure it died or something. I can't remember what, but the steam sent him to the hospital. He was in the ER because he was breathing it, and it shut down. Started to shut down his respiratory system. But don't be afraid of the zoanthids. That's rare, the ones that will kill you. But just be aware that you should wear gloves. I never did, and I was fine. But just to look out for my other coral, I don't get anemones, and I don't do the zoanthid thing. But again, that's just me. All right.
Well, I think you make a good point when you talk about the zoanthids, and really any soft coral is going to release toxins as kind of a passive defense method. Mm-hmm. So to deal with that, a bag of carbon in your filter system will take care of all of that. It's no big deal. Just put a bag of carbon in there, replace it every week to month, whatever it turns out you actually need it. But that's all you got to do. It's not a big deal in your tank. You're just going to need a little bit of carbon.
Right, and the carbon is good for a few days because it can only hold so many toxins, right? So if you leave it in your tank, in your sump, or wherever you keep that bag, if you don't use a reactor, that's fine. It's not going to, people say it'll start leaching toxins into your tank. It won't. It'll hold those into the carbon. You'll be fine. It just won't do anything for you any longer once it's filled up. So, you know, like Scott said, once a week, once a month. I was doing it once a week. Now I do it once a month, just to kind of keep things in check, to remove anything in the water that may be in there. Also, you may not notice it, but your water will have a slight yellow tint to it. You can tell this when you do a water change in a white bucket. Put some regular water in there, then put water that you just did a water change from your tank. There's going to be a little difference. Carbon will get rid of that, and your tank will really shine if you put a bag of carbon in there once a week. You'll see, or once a month. You'll see a difference. I did. I never used to use the carbon, but now I do, and there's a nice difference.
And if your water starts to stink a little bit, carbon will take care of that.
Right.
That's actually one of the biggest benefits to carbon, in my opinion, is your tank smells better.
Right, and another thing with carbon, if you're going to be using it, make sure that it's sealed tight in its container, in its jar, or that if it's in a bag, maybe put it in a large freezer bag and Ziploc that shut, because it's an absorbing agent, and it will absorb things from the air, and it's a purifying agent. That's what it does. Which I wonder, on a side topic, like if you had like the flu or the common cold, I wonder if you were laying in your bed and you kept like a big vat of carbon, if it would suck the virus into it. I don't know.
I would doubt that would work.
So anyway, that's all about carbon. So that's a great point too. This got brought up on the carbon. We're at 25 minutes. That's pretty good, I think.
Nice.
That's a good place to end, I think.
I think so.
You guys, thank you for watching. We say we want to keep these shows to 15 minutes, and we do the best we can. I personally don't like longer shows, but we touch on a lot of good topics, and it just went, whatever, longer than 15 minutes, but that's fine. Every Sunday, Reef Talk, if you want to be on Reef Talk, drop us a line, instant message us, let us know. All you need is a webcam. We do this via Skype. We record it, and that's a lot of fun. So let us know. We have the guest choose the topic. Maybe it's something on your tank. Maybe it's something you want to get for your tank. Maybe it's a product review, whatever. If you're also a manufacturer or you've got a product and you want us to, demonstrate it, we're all for that. Always looking for sponsors and products to show to our viewers. So, check out Scott's channel, Mile High Reefers. I'm Steve, Router 2 Brief. Links are below in the description for our individual channels. And we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.